So targets all over the body. It stimulates protein production and anabolism in general. It'll stimulate nutrient uptake so that we can fuel that growth. During adolescence, it's active all over the place. After adolescence, its main target is the liver, where it continues to stimulate insulin-like growth factor production. Our next hormone then that we can talk about, or another tropic hormone we can talk about, would be, let's do thyroid stimulating hormone. So we've got cells in the anterior pituitary, the thyrotropes. They are responding to TRH, which is thyrotropin releasing hormone. So they've got TRH receptors. And when TRH is bound, these hormones release thyroid stimulating hormone. Thyroid stimulating hormone is going to enter the blood and it's going to hit receptors on the basal level of those thyroid follicular cells, the basal side. So the basal side of our follicular cells has TSH receptors. TSH is a peptide, so it binds its receptor and it's going to activate second messengers inside the cell. And a whole bunch of stuff is going to happen. It's going to start production of the protein that we find out in the colloid called thyroglobulin. So when TSH binds, we'll stimulate thyroglobulin production. It will stimulate thyroid hormone release. It's going to cause iodine uptake. Iodine is needed to make thyroid hormone. So thyroid hormone is a really unique hormone. It's made out in the colloid, and it's made in this protein thyroglobulin. Proteins are just chains of amino acids. So in that chain of amino acids, there are going to be two tyrosines. And we're going to stick them together, and then we're going to stick iodine on them. So all of that is required for active thyroid hormone production. If you've got a deficiency in iodine, then you can't make thyroid hormone, you'll get a goiter. So there are places in the world that have low iodine levels. They're called goiter belts, where goiters are commonly seen. So another thing that TSH does, well, it's going to turn on and off enzymes. To get iodine in, we've got to bring it in through a symporter, but then we've got to pump it out to the colloid. So this is one of those examples where second messengers do a ton of stuff inside the cell. So ultimately what we care about is that it's causing the release of thyroid hormones. Our thyroid hormones are going to increase basal metabolic rate. So thyroid hormones in general increase basal metabolic rate. You can kind of see the effects of thyroid. It's really hard to see the effects of thyroid hormones unless you have a problem. But as soon as you have a problem, it's very easy to see that there's something going on. So people who are secreting high levels of thyroid hormone tend to be very thin and very hot, and their eyes can be buggy, and they'll be really nervous and anxious and high energy, and it's because they've got really high basal metabolic rate. People who are low or hyposecreting thyroid hormone will tend to be they can put on more weight. They can be very sluggish and very tired. They're very cold sensitive. So thyroid hormone in general, for if you had to pick something that it does, you could say it increases basal metabolic rate, and that's pretty much what you need to know about that. So that's why it works with growth hormones synergistically to increase growth, and why they work so much better together, because it's increasing metabolism in cells that it's bound to. All right, any questions on that? Okay, we'll do another pathway. All right, so for our next one, let's do ACTH. So ACTH is coming from cells called corticotropes. And ACTH ACTH is the tropic hormone. It's released in response to corticotropin-releasing hormone. So these cells have CRH receptors. When CRH is bound, they will release ACTH. ACTH is the adrenocorticotropic hormone. So it travels to the adrenal glands, and specifically stimulates the zona fasciculata, to release cortisol. Cortisol is our glucocorticoid. It's also our stress hormone. So high levels of stress would cause CRH release. So when we've got high levels of stress, we'll increase CRH production, we'll increase ACTH production, we'll increase cortisol production. If you think about what stress is, it's some kind of negative physiological response to some environmental stimuli. So if we've got a negative environmental stimuli, then we need to be able to get away from it. So we need to increase our energy availability, so that's what glucocorticoids do. Cortisol is going to, there are receptors in every cell in the body. Some cells are less sensitive to it, so your epithelial cells in your skin, for example, aren't very sensitive to it. But over the long term, if you're chronically stressed, they will respond. Your skin will start thinning out, and you'll have problems. So cortisol can target every cell in the body. Some of the main targets are going to be skeletal muscle. This is what makes cortisol dangerous. So when you've got high levels of cortisol present in the system, you'll start breaking down skeletal muscle, because it's easier to get glucose from muscle tissue, from proteins, than it is from fat. So in the absence of glucose, we can do all these really crazy conversion pathways in the liver to get glucose from non-glucose substrates, and cortisol will hit skeletal muscle and break down that protein so that we can use it for gluconeogenesis, or the production of new glucose. So that's a big target for it. Let's see, what else do I want to say about cortisol? Again, it can affect every cell in the body. It impairs the immune system. So you have high levels of cortisol present, you're more likely to get sick. What else? I guess that's mostly what I want to say about that. Let me step back here and say, okay, we talked about stress is releasing CRH. What's causing the release of TRH? So TRH is under a negative feedback loop. So if you've got low levels of thyroid hormone, you'll increase TRH release. So if you've got a drop in TH, that will stimulate our TRH release. So that's under a normal negative feedback loop. Most of our hormones are under normal negative feedback loop. They've got to be kept in some homeostatic range. And if you move outside of that, then you'll either inhibit the releasing hormone or stimulate its production so that you can get back to homeostasis. Any questions on that? All right, let's do another pathway. Yeah.
So, with the ACTH,
Okay, yeah.
for that regulation, is that a neural regulation?
So much
Yeah.
to try to do.
ACTH is under hormonal regulation because CRH is stimulating ACTH production. CRH release is neural. You could think of stress as being a neural response. You do also have to have, there are certain times in the day, like right before you wake up, when you'll have a peak in cortisol. So there are times when it's normal to have cortisol around, but in our 24-hour day society, most of us have too much all the time. So it's kind of stress or time of day can be our CRH release. But yeah, ACTH is because it's under hormonal regulation due to CRH. All right, so next we could do our gonadotropins, which are coming from cells, the gonadotropes. They have Gnrh receptors. So the releasing hormone is gonadotropin releasing hormone, or GnRH. GnRH is tricky. In females, it's under during the first part of the ovarian cycle, rising levels of estrogen will cause rising levels of GnRH. During the second part, GnRH is going to kind of slow down. So we'll talk more about that specifically in females at the end of the semester. In males, it's very straightforward. GnRH release is based on the level of testosterone. So let's say this is a male, because males are easy, then we would say low testosterone would stimulate GnRH release. It's a normal negative feedback loop in males. It's not in females. It has different regulation throughout different parts of the ovarian cycle. That's why we're going to go over the really specifics of those when we get to that system, because it's just too much now. But GnRH, when it binds to our gonadotropes, will cause FSH and LH release. The targets for FSH in the males are what are called sustentacular cells, or nurse cells, and FSH is going to stimulate these cells to help nourish the development of sperm. So our follicle stimulating hormone in the males is really going to help stimulate these other cells that are helping grow the sperm. In females, it's going to stimulate our cells called granulosa cells, and it stimulates the development of a follicle. That's where it gets its name. It's the follicle stimulating hormone. So it gets its name for what it does in females. And the cells that are the targets are granulosa cells, and they're going to stimulate follicle development. So basically doing the same thing, nourishing the growing oocyte. So we'll say follicle development to grow what's called the oocyte. Here, I'll write it over here.
Oh, I can.
So we'll stimulate follicle development to grow the oocyte. LH is the luteinizing hormone. In males, it targets cells called Leydig cells, and it causes them to produce testosterone. What does testosterone do? It goes off and it stimulates all of the things that we associate with male. So it stimulates increased protein anabolism, increased facial hair development, increased aggression, increased libido. So those are effects of testosterone. We could say increase protein, increase hair, increase aggression, and increase libido. In females, LH stimulates cells called thecal cells. These cells are going to produce estrogen and another hormone called progesterone after ovulation. Ovulation is due to an LH surge. So LH also stimulates ovulation. And that's through production of prostaglandins that are going to rupture the cell wall. So that's not directly because of the thecal cells. So LH is kind of important. What does estrogen do? Estrogen, throughout the first half of the ovarian cycle before ovulation, it's going to increase thickening of the uterine wall by stimulating mitosis in endometrial cells. So the innermost layer of the uterus is called the endometrium. So it's going to stimulate mitosis in the endometrium so that we increase cell size or cell number, and we'll increase our cell size. So we'll say increase cell size. After after ovulation, progesterone is going to be the main hormone that's helping. I mean, there's still estrogen around, but progesterone is really kind of taking over. And what it does is it further thickens the endometrium, and it will start the growth of what are called uterine glands, and will develop more blood vessels. So we'll increase blood vessels and uterine glands. Any questions on our gonadotropics or anything? Okay then, the last pathway that we talk about is prolactin. Prolactin is released from cells called lactotropes. And lactotropes, absent anything, will secrete prolactin. So if you were to remove the pituitary gland from an animal, stick it in a petri dish with everything it needs to survive, cut it off from all hypothalamic input, then those cells will start secreting prolactin. That's what they do. Lactotropes make prolactin. If they've got everything in that petri dish they need to survive, then they'll just start making prolactin. That means these cells are always under inhibition unless we've had that surge in oxytocin that will inhibit dopamine release. So the prolactin release inhibiting hormone is what's being released, prolactin release inhibiting hormone. This is the chemical dopamine. So under normal circumstances, dopamine is bound to its receptors and you don't release prolactin. So that's what's going on normally. Again, at the end of gestation, when you have that surge in oxytocin, and then if you continue nursing and continue with that neural stimulation, oxytocin will inhibit prolactin release. So prolactin inhibiting hormone release, my apologies. Oxytocin inhibits dopamine release, so it won't be bound, and now our lactotropes will produce prolactin. And the targets for prolactin are the mammary glands. And the action is to increase milk protein production. Oxytocin is going to be what stimulates the letdown of milk. Prolactin is what's going to be what stimulates the production of milk. So you have to have both for effective, efficient lactation.